Chapter 5 of Over 1,000 Beatings, Spiritual Sanity, and the Rejection of Evil by Bill Neely. A buttercup lemon light, a glimmer of hope, not to be broken, a willful effort to be sincere, an inner creation of a winter-green mist, the liveliness of a spontaneity of innermost being. I was in the 9th grade. I was home. It was dinner time. My 3 younger brothers, my mother, my father, and I were there. I was sitting beside my father during all of the 18 years that I lived in that household. I only had 2 conversations with my father. This was the first of the 2. I said, "Dad, can I talk to you after dinner alone?" He said, "Okay." Dinner ended. My mother and brothers left the table. I was alone with my father. He was just sitting there, mute. I said to him with all the sincerity and earnestness that I could muster from within the depths of my heart, "Dad, you know, when you hit me, you really hurt me. Would you please stop hitting me?" There wasn't even a pause from him. He just burst out laughing uncontrollably, like what I had just said was the funniest thing he had ever heard. I pushed my chair back. I got up from it, and as I walked away from the table with my back to him, I heard him laughing aloud all the more. Being the act, the decision, and the choice to be instead of not being, the rejection of my reality was the moment in time when I knew him for the evil that he was. He became diminished in my eyes to the point of no return. From that day onward, I disowned him as my father. All the names he called me, yet I did not have a derogatory one for him. In my mind's eye, I tried to make him a no one, someone who wasn't worthy of thought. I had a faith in believing in God and in goodness. I trusted that by being a good person, I would persevere through what was being done to me by this no one. I was optimistic when I became an adult man that I would have a successful career in the business world. I would be married to a lovely young woman, and the 2 of us together would experience a measure of happiness. Those were my expectations. In the 9th grade, I tried not to curse outwardly nor inwardly. That wasn't who I was or sought to be. I had a liking, a respect, and a gratitude towards the Catholic nuns who were in my life for so many years. I felt I would be dishonoring any one of them if I started cursing. I did not want to be like either my mother or father, as if the way they behaved was contagious. I wanted to be worthy of my fellow man and woman's friendship and acceptanceship. I wanted to be a good person and living my life. I am thankful towards my mother. When I was in the 6th grade, she got me a job as a newspaper boy. Though I only earned a few dollars, the money went a long way back then in the early 1960s. I held on to the job for 5 years. I knew, in spite of what my mother called me, that she cared for me. I stayed on the football team as a scrub. I made a great effort not to be home when my biological father was. I hung out either in or outside the ice cream shop with my freshman classmates. If it was lunchtime and the biological father was home, then I would go to the bakery and buy some pastries to eat for lunch. Afterwards, I would go up to the town pool hall and hang out up there. I made acquaintances, and I still dreamed of romantic love with a pretty girl. I had money to spend to keep clear of my household. I had a newfound knowledge of evil, though I was still naive. The biological father still got me. He ambushed me once a week like clockwork for the remaining time that I was in his household, from when I was 14 up until I left at 18. It wasn't until many years later, maybe 20 years, that I realized that the beating that was once a week wasn't happenstance. It was calculated and premeditated on his part. He seldom, if ever, missed a week of beating me. It was my hope to survive being his son. Now, instead of almost every day, it was only once a week that he was able to beat me. I was optimistic. I felt that when I graduated from high school, I would have a life to live that would be meaningful and worthwhile. When I was in the 9th grade, I made a connection between what was being done to me and the stuttering I had, and to the laughter and ridicule I experienced at times from my classmates. I didn't want the same for my younger brothers. I felt my mother should be doing something to stop this monster's behavior towards any of us 4 boys. I had heard back then that an ostrich, when attacked and feeling terror, would burrow a hole into the ground to stick their head into. He wouldn't have to see himself being attacked, and therefore wouldn't be afraid. This was the way I thought of my mother. She was an ostrich. I felt she should have done more than just to stand over him while he was beating me and yelling at him, Don't mark his face, he has to go to school tomorrow." At that age, and even in later years, I couldn't see that he was preying upon her and destroying her spirituality just in a way that was different from what he was doing to me. A lot of thinking was going on inside me while I was in the 9th grade. I learned that I was weak physically and mentally. I couldn't punch my way out of a paper bag. There was such an aura of shame and withdrawal about me that I couldn't look anyone in the eye. I still had my dreams and hopes for romantic love, yet I had come to realize that I lived in a delusional paradise of false truth and self-deception. It offered me a means of escape and diversion from the real reality of what I was experiencing. The shaming of myself by throwing a fit on the floor, and then losing my mind by screaming and crying for my life. My hope was that one day I would have a life of my own, free from all of this. The spiritual sanity that I experienced when I was in the 9th grade was through caring about my 3 younger brothers and not doing to any of the 3 what was being done to me. It was a remarkable accomplishment on my part because I would feel a tremendous, overpowering rage at being attacked and being beat. I made a choice back then, and I held true to fulfill the commitment. I made it into an inner reality that became a part of my living being and soul, in a way of sustaining the good and absence of evil within me. I chose to travel along a path that was the most important to me, and that my brothers not suffer the same fate that I was becoming aware of. Being an object of ridicule and scorn by my school peers, what I began to see with clarity was the look that two of them wore upon their facial countenances. It truly was a window into their souls, their innermost beings. Kurt, who was 2 years younger than me, had a constant look of despair, hopelessness, and resignation. He seemed to always be unhappy and sad. I felt for him. I cared about his welfare, and being along with a hope that the least of harm should come to him. He was 12 years old. My other brother, Jim, wore a guise of a warrior. His facial features were always stern and fierce. He never ever let his guard down. He knew his circumstances. He, too, was being beaten and cursed at by my father. He was 10 years old at the time. He seemed to be already a broken child, such as I was. My youngest brother, Jack, was 6 years younger than me. He was 8 at the time. There had been an agreement behind closed doors, a deal reached between my mother and father that she was allowed to bring Jack up by herself, without my father beating or cursing him. I knew this because at times my father would begin to get angry with Jack from an early age on up. He would say words to the effect of, "He is getting away with bad behavior. I am going to discipline him." My father would then take several steps towards Jack. If my mother was in another room, she would literally come flying out of the kitchen or living room, shrieking all the while, "No, no, no." It would come to a standstill, all three of them. Jack would be standing or sitting on the floor. My father would be one step removed from him, and my mother would be between Jack and my father. Sometimes she would be bent over at the waist, shielding Jack from him. Then he would walk away from the two of them. To my knowledge, he never struck Jack physically or assaulted him verbally. This exact same scenario and sequence of events repeated itself over and over countless times throughout a number of years. My younger brother was helpless. He was at the mercy of my father. My mother knew what was going on and how wrong my father's behaviors were towards my younger brothers and me. I had yet to acquire the imagination of what life might be like for her living with my father and going to sleep every night with him. What must the stress have been like for her, even though he never hit her physically or cursed her? Would she not wonder that it was only going to be a matter of time before he would turn on her, calling her horrible names, and then in a full-blown, crazed rage, begin slapping and hitting her again and again? The first few months of being in the 9th grade was going to school in the morning and becoming aware of how bad off my state of affairs were, from stuttering in my classes to going to football practices and being ridiculed. These two experiences alone were crushing me inside.